They say the sea itself caught fire. On the night of July 17, 1951, Bahia Lodosa burned so bright that fishermen thought dawn had come early. By morning, Puerto del Lodo was gone, every wharf and wooden house reduced to black water and ash. It began with a spark in the northern fuel depots. The wind turned, the pumps failed, and a wall of flames swept through the port. From the ruins came a promise: never again. The government formed the Compañía Energética Nacional de Palma, CENPAL, to rebuild and master the fuel that destroyed them. Concrete rose where trust had burned, and for a while the city glowed with new purpose. CENPAL built apartments, schools, and the great refinery whose towers still rise above the bay. Billboards shouted, "Energía para todos." At night the stacks lit the sky, and people called it the city that never slept. But the air smelled of diesel and salt, and fishermen sailed farther each year to find clean water. Then prices fell, and the money vanished. Cracks split the towers. Paint peeled from CENPAL's slogans. The jobs were gone, and the new city aged faster than the old one ever did. The refinery still burns at night, but its light reaches no one. Today, Puerto del Lodo is among the poorest corners of Monte Palma, a city built for an economy that never returned. Families still live in those same blocks, progress long forgotten. Fishermen mend their nets beneath rusted cranes, waiting for a tide that never changes. Puerto del Lodo endures, caught between fire and sea, still chasing the light it once mistook for dawn.
Hello, and welcome back to Monte Palma. In this week's episode, we're going to be filling in the area between the church and the waterfront, and we're going to start building out the peninsula here. A lot of this area is still a work in progress, so we're doing the initial trying to figure stuff out. A lot of that is not going to be finished in this episode, but the area we're looking at right now below us, this will be all built out down here. The first thing I want to do here is continue our outdoor market street along a pedestrian walkway, and we're going to do a few alterations to the shoreline here, preparing for what's going to be coming up over the next few episodes, like laying the groundwork right now. And we're also going to be continuing our outdoor market down to the waterfront, where we're going to have just a strip of parking directly along the water. This is definitely not going to be a tourist area. This is a working waterfront, so there's no like beach or anything down here. I also have this little area of land, the off-ramp here. We're just going to create a little bridge connection and build this out with a bit more residential. One of the first things we're going to be figuring out here is I need a college, but I don't really want a college building, so we're going to use the French college here. It can look like a kind of generic office. It doesn't necessarily look like an educational building. Now I wanted to use the decals here to hide the white, but as we can see, they don't work very well at a distance here, so I have to figure out a different solution. For the peninsula, we're going to be enhancing it a bit, making it look a little more natural, blending it into the landscape a little bit. This is the area that burned down, so this is all going to look fairly modern compared to what the rest of the city would look like. Also going to be a fuel refinery out here. I started with the oil refinery, but the problem with this is I was going to do the oil refinery and the fuel refinery, but if we look from the tourist district over, the oil refinery is just nothing but smoke and smokestacks. So we're just going to stick with the fuel refinery, and I'm going to be putting down one functional version of it and then a static version of it just to build it out, make it look larger. The reason I'm doing this is it just controls the number of actual smokestacks producing smoke. Now to continue our market / commercial area here, I'm going to be building this out mostly with static props. Some buildings are going to be functioning. These ones I'm putting down, these Japanese ones, these are functional. Here's the reason why. These assets come with lots around them that are just ridiculously large, and I can't fit them in to the smaller areas I'm trying to build. So the nice thing about the static assets is they don't have any of that, and it's totally up to me how to fill in the area around them, and I'm okay with that. Where I can use vanilla assets, I'll try. Because it's so tight building in here, I can't fit them in. I'm also using these Chinese assets. These are fine, I think they're okay. The problem with them is I can't recolor them. If I could recolor these to pastel shades, they'd be perfect, but I'll use them as is. And I'll be filling in all the little odd areas here with probably empty lots and parking spaces. Because of the glitchy decals on the backside here, we're just going to splice in another static version of the college. I'm going to change the height of it just a little bit, just to give it a bit of asymmetrical interest, so it's not a mirror copy. I think it looks alright, and it could be some sort of government building. I think is probably where it's going to be in our landscape. Fair amount of like low residential neighborhoods, and it's the exact same building process that I used in the last 2 episodes, so I'm not going to show a whole lot of that. I'm getting rid of this ugly tower here. I never did like it, and we're going to put in something maybe a little shorter, a little more appropriate for our cityscape. And once again, we're splicing a functional building together with a prop just to make it look a little more unique, fill in the space a little better. And for the residential area I'm going to be working on here, I'm not going to show a whole lot of this, just some highlights from it. This building down here, I'm using the tower from the Eastern European fire station, creating a building that I guess we could read it as a small church. Also, for the low-density residential neighborhoods around here, I've already built several fairly well-detailed neighborhoods. These are probably going to be, for the most part, lower detail. They're like backdrop to other parts of the city at this point. So just enough detailing so they blend in well, but they're not going to be perfect. We're usually only going to be seeing these particular buildings from a bit of a distance. Also, with the static assets, I've been creating my own buildings, and we're going to splice a bunch together here. So I like this European residential building here because of the arched balconies, like breezeways, which I think fits the region. We're going to splice in some commercial buildings on the lower side, so that it's a commercial front, and on the back side, because we have a bit of a hill here, on the back side we're going to add a lower elevation, we're going to splice in some industrial buildings to the back for the waterfront itself. And some of the southwest buildings here, I think, work fine. One thing I realized over the course of this build is to make these things look appropriate for a Central American type region, they need just a lot of detailing, relying on a lot of decals here to make these buildings look like they belong here. During this episode, we'll see a lot of this as transforming these kind of pristine buildings into something a little more worn down by the environment. I find the Japanese buildings work very well for this region. I've said it in the previous episode. They have a fairly generic look about them, but not a North American generic look. So if we sprinkle a few of these around, I think they fit in just fine. Other buildings like the one I'm putting right down here, I don't mind them. I think they would fit. The problem is there's no option to recolor these other than the roof, which is a bit of a limitation to them. And once again, I have a bit of a hill here. In order to compensate for the hill without distorting the terrain too much, one set of buildings is going to be leveled to the road, and then the other set is going to be leveled to the road below. So you kind of get this step, which is how a lot of buildings handle uneven terrain, which unfortunately nothing in the game actually behaves that way, but we can fake it. And I have to say, I'm having a lot of fun puzzling out the buildings, taking the static versions of vanilla buildings and then splicing them together in different ways to create something that looks a little new, like something newer looking. Now for this section of the town that was rebuilt during the 1950s, this is all going to look very modern, and it's going to have kind of a more modern layout to it. This area is going to take a considerable amount of detailing to get it to look right. I started in this episode, I don't finish it. This area is not finished yet. One thing I'm waiting for this entire area is obviously the Ports and Bridges DLC. For the fuel refinery area, I want to add a very small port facility to it, and also to the adjacent rebuilt area of the town, I want to include a fishing port, and I also want to include some sort of ferry service to connect this area to what eventually will become the capital region for the entire country. That's obviously a ways off yet for the build, but I am thinking about it. I'm hoping that ferry service might alleviate some of the road issues I'm having. Although now that everybody's moved in and traffic has settled down, I'm not really having a lot of traffic issues, but it might become more of an issue in the future. For the commercial section of this rebuilt section of town, I want kind of low density commercial. It's gonna not, right now as I'm laying everything out, this is not gonna look, it's not gonna look quite right. It will take some time to fill this in with buildings. It's essentially just going for the buildings and find things that might be appropriate. Using the ploppable assets here, these buildings are just too tall, to be honest. And we can use the static versions and just sink them into the ground and make them shorter. What's really going to sell this section of town is the urban decay. I'm using the city of Cologne, Panama as inspiration here. If you're not familiar with Cologne, if you think about Panama City, the capital, that's on the Pacific side of the canal, and Cologne is on the Caribbean side. And Cologne was historically very important. This would be the port city. People would get off coming from Europe. They'd take a train across to Panama City and hop on another boat to continue on the voyage. Once the canal was built, it didn't really seem to have much purpose, and it's fallen into like serious terminal decline. And if you go take to Google Earth and do like street views of it, it's a very impoverished area. So I'm using it as inspiration to get a feel of how I want this area to look around here. It's obviously not going to be an exact copy, and I'm not really trying to copy Cologne. Like I said, it's just I'm using it as inspiration. The unfortunate reality is I'm missing like architectural types of buildings that are appropriate. Like Spanish colonial would be perfect here. I don't really have there isn't anything in game that looks like that. So it's not going to be perfect, but I'll make the best attempt I can with it. Also, the peninsula is just looking a little too boxy, so I'm just going to enhance some of the terrain, like the waterfront around it, give it a more natural appearance. Also adding a church here. When looking at street views of Cologne, I did find a church that seemed very out of place. It felt much more like an English church or something like that. So this one here is going to be our stand-in for it. For industry in this region, it's going to be mostly warehouses. Once again, we're using the static versions of these, and we'll just turn them into functional industry buildings with service cubes here. Now, pretty much all the residential buildings on the peninsula here, by our current time, they're mostly all tenement housing. There might be a few nicer apartments right along the waterfront, but it's going to be fairly poor. Right at the very end here, we're going to put in a bit of park area. And I do want this to be a functional area as well, so I have to include some support buildings. So I'm putting down a couple of schools and a small medical clinic and fire station, just to cater to the needs of the citizens and make sure everything doesn't burn down. These are the hearse garages from the Netherlands cemetery or crematorium. These are great. It just has a gated garage area for a business of some sort. I think these are wonderful. And here I'm just going to use them to turn them into kind of some industrial buildings. When this area was rebuilt, they made an attempt to turn the waterfront into a park area. And is it successful? Probably not. And for this episode, I'm just putting in where I want it to be. I don't really detail out this too much. And for the road network I'm drawing in here, this is all going to be low density residential. I'm not going to show building any of this, but here's an overview of what I've been filling in. This is like a background project. It's not complete yet, and I'll be just building out most of this off camera. Now for the detailing, and it's the detailing that really sells this, makes it feel much more appropriate. First thing is we gotta hide any imperfections where the static props don't interact with the terrain very well, so some plants. For storefronts here, we're using the service cubes to make them functional, but they don't come with any signage or anything like that. So we're gonna add some signage here just to indicate that there are actually businesses down here. And the waterfront is not going to be anything too special. We're just going to make a rock retaining wall here and add some plants. Not a tourist beach area by any stretch. Now, one of the biggest issues I keep encountering is the road surfaces. They're not anywhere near or close enough to the type of distressed surface I need. So in order to get this look right, it requires a lot of decals and surfaces. Also, I have started creating my own appropriate advertisements and billboards for the region. This is a work in progress. I have a few done, and I'll add more as we go. Now that the new decaying decal packs that came out in PDX Mod Store a couple weeks ago, I can't stress how important these things are to really sell the look of these distressed, aging buildings. We're in a tropical environment, so water damage is going to be the primary thing that's going to be the wear and tear on these buildings. So moss, streaking, all that sort of stuff. Just decaying rooftops. I have found like the most bang for my buck for detailing is detailing the roofs. If you think about it, you spend most of your time looking down at your city. So just detailing out the roofs drastically changes the look of the district or the area you're working on. And it's not a huge detailing effort to do. I'm getting a little more elaborate here. I'm like layering up different decals to really play with trying to age them up and make them look really dirty. You could probably get away with some minimal surface work here and still have a really decent look to it, I think. These rusty roof decals, I just love these things. They're so appropriate. I only wish there were a few more variations on them. I might consider making my own here for this. And where I can, I recolor buildings to these bright pastel shades. They look a little too neat and tidy here. We will be taking care of that in a second. And I'm still experimenting with the roads, figuring out how to detail them in ways that we can, all this wear and tear, something like an easy technique that I can replicate over a large area. Still working on that bit. I am surprised how much the decals really changed the impression the buildings give. Like as soon as you start adding a whole bunch of stress and decay to them, all of a sudden they start to really, it's just surprising how flexible the buildings actually truly are. It's just really the pristine, perfect look of them that is essentially their issue. So just coming in here, adding some wear and tear and age to them. What I'm building down here is a bit of a continuation from the market district across the street. This is like opportunistic vendors and stuff just setting up some stuff. It's not the official market. It's kind of like just an outgrowth of the market area. Thank you to everybody who responded to my little poll here. I was just curious to see what people were interested in most so far about what I was building here. It's not necessarily that I'm going to be refocusing my attention on any one specific thing. As far as I'm concerned, they're all intertwined with one another. They support each other. The historical colonial story, it bleeds into the other time periods, right? So it's kind of like one aspect of history builds on top of another. So I was just more curious to see what people were finding more interesting. So far it seems to be the colonial history, which is great, but obviously not all the history of this region takes place at colonial time. So just keep in mind that for foundational stories for different areas, yes, it's definitely going to be colonial, but also we have to focus on different historical time periods as well, just to flesh out the entire story. Now I'm going to spend a fair amount of time in this area detailing this out. This is an extension of the market street where we transition more to storefronts. very poor area of town, probably one of the poorest areas, and I need to use detailing here to really sell that. Like, I think here's a perfect example, transforming this generic Japanese building in here to something that looks like it's an extremely impoverished area of town. I think it works fairly well here. And for the Chinese buildings here, like this is going to be a perfect example of how the decals really transform these buildings. I want to add some graffiti to the key wall here, but they won't stick. So what I do is embed a static building inside it. And if you use real vision decals, they have a meter depth to them, like a depth of a meter. So they actually will show up at this point. So I can add a little bit of graffiti, but it's a bit of a workaround to get it to look right. And some plants sunk way low into the ground just to act as weeds growing on in the concrete and asphalt. Another custom-made sign here. I have to make more of these rotting signage from, might be a sign that has been there for the last 40, 50 years or something. These net lanes I'm using below here are from another YouTuber, Mike Builds. Does a very nice set of these. You'll have to go to his YouTube page to find out where to find them. He doesn't work through PDX mods, and he doesn't make them available for other sites, so you have to go through him directly to find them, but they work very well for some older roads. It's a quick and easy solution for creating them. And another thing, like all the advertising that came with the buildings, especially for a North American build, it seemed a bit excessive. But for a Central American country, it actually doesn't feel like it's quite enough. So I have to spend a fair amount of time here adding my own signage to buildings. To be honest, I think I'd be probably putting even more of it in. And here's where these buildings really start to transform. This particular distress, the moss on these things really does indicate that they're in an environment which is really hard on the buildings. Some street art here. And here's another really good example of how the detailing really transforms an entire area. It really gives it a personality that the vanilla assets just can't get with the vanilla assets. So for this warehouse district here, the very first thing we're going to do is add some distress decals to the roofing here, some rusting, and then some rust decals to the actual side of the buildings. And then some stainage. And I'm going to be using these door decals here to hide the vanilla doors and just make them give them each their own unique personality. I haven't really used these too much yet, but they're very handy. And these buildings are going to be heavily covered with graffiti. Also covering up the parking surface here. So it looks like an old foundation to another building. It really adds a lot of character. And then just layering up some stains and some dirt decals here just to give it a bit more wear and tear. This is a prop I don't use nearly enough. These come from the French regional pack, the French walls. These are wonderful. I really need to start using these a bit more often. We're going to add some fake doors to the back of these so we have access to this back lot back here. One great thing about the French walls is some decals actually do stick to them, so we can add all this kind of distressed textures to them. Put a few posters along them, add a bit of graffiti, and yeah, these are, I definitely need to be using these more in this particular build. As for the sidewalks, I haven't really come to a real good decision yet of how to detail them up properly. This is generic Lemon's sidewalk surface, which is great. This needs a little more detailing, a little more distress to the surface here to make it look correct. I'm going to spend a bit of time here. So this is the central boulevard to the rebuilt area of the town. I'm just going to be detailing out this area. I really need the Ports and Bridges DLC to come out before I can really think about finishing off this area, but I just want to get a start to it here. For the very central area, it's a central walkway with some parks along the way. And it really is the detailing here that's going to hopefully sell it as an impoverished area. The park would have been like a public works project to beautify the area, built at a much more optimistic time in this area's history. And obviously, as we move into modern times, none of that really came to be. And we're once again left with a very impoverished area of the city. And a bit of staining here just to break up the uniform color a bit. I think that adds a lot of personality. Fairly low effort. I'm going to spend a bit of time just detailing a few of these buildings along the main street here, just to give you an idea of the process to turn them into something that looks a little more appropriate for the type of area in the city I'm trying to represent here. Once again, most of this is done through surfaces and decals. For these particular buildings, so these are the prop versions of some commercial buildings. I think these are Northeast Pack. The prop versions don't come with storefronts, which you have to add yourself. But for this particular case, that actually works out really well because they actually look like boarded up street fronts. So if you're trying to create a distressed main street to a small town, these things are great. You just throw up some posters or some graffiti over the blank surfaces, and they look exactly like boarded up buildings. It's perfect. And as you can see, we can make things look very run down, or just using these sorts of tools here, we could really transform what the neighborhood looks like. And it's really, this is what sells it, is the level of decay, which really ties the whole thing together. When I first started building out this whole area, everything looks way too pristine, and I'm trying to think about how it's going to look, and I'm putting down buildings and everything looks way too perfect. I'm like, oh, this is never ever going to work. But then once I start putting in the details, I'm like, okay, I buy it. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I really do appreciate it. I will see everybody next week or next episode. Bye.